change your world. It's time to let it go. The things you used to think, the things you used to know, they don't help you anymore. It's time to change your mind. If it's peace you want to find.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Change Your World, we'll be in the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. So grab your Bible and let's get started.
It's time to change your world. You need to let it go.
And so what I think that since Abner, since he can't secure the throne here for himself, and with him seeing that Ishbosheth's kingdom has no future, he decides to join the winning side and to join with King David. And so he says to Ishbosheth, he says, am I a dog's head that I belong to Judah? And if I was Ishbosheth, I would have says, well, if it looks like a dog's head and it talks like a dog's head, yes, Abner, you're a dog's head. But Ishbosheth, he didn't say nothing like that because he's afraid of Abner, because Abner's very powerful and he's actually running the kingdom. So I kind of see him as kind of like Marlon Brando in The Godfather. So, and he's going around and he's making everybody an offer they can't refuse. And so I'm sure here that Ishbosheth, he regrets ever saying anything to Abner at all, because Abner is boldly telling Ishbosheth that he's going to give his loyalty to David and he's going to bring David the whole kingdom, which is an offer that he can't refuse. And then he says, from Dan to Beersheba, which is about 150 miles, and which means all of Israel, from the northernmost border all the way to the southern border. And Abner, he's the man that can do it. And Abner, in his own words, he acknowledges that he knew that he was acting against God's word when he made Ishbosheth king, where he admits to Ishbosheth that he knows that the Lord had sworn this for David, to give him the kingdom. So Abner, who instigated everything in making Ishbosheth the king, well, now he's jumping ship and he's deserting Ishbosheth, and there's nothing that Ishbosheth can do about it because he's powerless. And so Abner, he begins the negotiations. So here we see again that King David, he is not seeking the kingdom for himself. That these negotiations, that they're not initiated by David, where David is trying to strive to gain the kingdom. Because David, he isn't trying to take the kingdom by force, and he's not trying to take it away from anyone. David has always been willing to wait for God to give him the kingdom, according to God's promise and according to God's timing. And so Abner here, he's finally doing the right thing, but he's doing it with the wrong motives. He's not doing it for God, and he's not doing it for David, but he's doing it to secure for himself a position in David's kingdom. And that's because Saul's house is getting weaker and David's house is getting stronger. And so Abner, he sends messengers to David to make sure that he'll be accepted by David so that he's not taken captive as a prisoner or executed. And Abner makes promises to David to bring all of Israel under David's rule. So he makes David this offer that he can't refuse, where David will receive the kingdom of Israel with no loss of life, not even one battle. Could this really be true? But with even such an amazing offer, David still has one condition, that David, he wouldn't even see Abner unless Abner brings back his first wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, back to him. Because as far as David's concerned, he's still married to Michal because he never divorced her. Although it's true that King Saul gave her away to another man back in 1 Samuel, and that was after David had to flee for his life, But what that did is that made Michal to have to live in an adulterous marriage. And because David never divorced Michal, there's no reason to believe that David still doesn't love her. David may have never stopped loving her. And we don't know what David's thinking, but he might be remembering Michal as his first love because she was his first wife, which would be more than just missing your high school sweetheart. And I'm sure that David, that he mourned after her for a long time, for quite a few years after having to flee from his home. And getting Michal back, because she is Saul's daughter, it would also show that David, he has no hostility towards Saul. And it also establishes David's legitimate relationship to King Saul as Saul's son-in-law, where he has a right to be legal heir to Saul's throne. But Michal here, she's just a pawn, and she's having to live this life that's made by other men's decisions, where she doesn't have any choices in any of these matters. But we do know that she did love David in the early years of their marriage. But a lot of things can change in 17 years. And it seems like there was a lot that was lost in those years apart that won't ever be regained. And we're going to see that later on. But what seems strange to me here is that Abner, he just doesn't go up and take Michal away. That David, he also sent messages to Ishbosheth to claim his wife, where he says, by those Philistine foreskins. But what really seems really odd to me is that Ishbosheth says, okay, that he doesn't have a problem with this. But then I think here you kind of got to remember that all these people, they actually know each other really well. Where Ishbosheth, if you look here, he's only about 5 years older than David. So that means he would have been at David and Michal's wedding because Ishbosheth is Michal's brother. So he would have known David as being part of the family, especially since Ishbosheth's older brother was David's best friend, Jonathan. And so all these players in this part of the story, they have a long history together, where at one time they had been family, even Abner. And so they know each other here for probably around 20 years. And you can see here that Ishbosheth, he really doesn't ever really know what to do because it's Abner who's the powerful one. And so he allows Abner to return Michal to David. Or I'm thinking that Ishbosheth, he may be feeling that he has to go along with this transfer of his father's kingdom to David. And you have to realize he's only been the king for 2 years here. And so he's not even going to try to fight it because Ishbosheth here, he's probably just hoping to try to save his life. Okay, so now Abner, he goes up and he picks up Michal according to Ishbosheth's orders. And Michal's new husband, Paltiel, the son of Laish, he starts following behind her and crying and weeping. And a lot of people, they feel sorry for this guy. And I don't know him, but many people do say, isn't this wrong for David? Taking her away from her tender, loving husband. Shouldn't David just leave her alone? Really, David, don't you have enough wives? Do you really need this one too? And to take her away from him? And it does really look like this Paltiel, that he really does love Michal, and with all the crying and weeping. But we don't know how Michal feels, because if you notice, it doesn't say here that Michal was crying over having to leave Paltiel. And it's very possible that she still loves David and that she wants to be the queen of Israel. But it really never ever seems to matter to anyone what she wanted or what she felt. But this guy, Paltiel, you really can't feel too sorry for him because he knew that he was marrying somebody else's wife who wasn't divorced. And he was still willing to marry her. And for some reason, he still did it. But you have to realize nobody made him marry her. And it's very possible that he married her for political reasons to become part of the royal family. But in any case, this is not a happy matter for anyone. And it says that Paltiel, that he followed him all the way to Bahurim, where Abner had to threaten him and told him to go home, where Abner, he again made him an offer he can't refuse. And Bahurim, that's on the border between the territories of Benjamin and Judah. And then we see that Abner, that he had communicated with all the leaders of the tribes because he's like the Godfather. He's the boss. And it's very important that this message comes from Abner and not from King David. And Abner reminds them that in times past, they wanted David to be their king. And it was common knowledge where everyone knew that the Lord had spoken of David, where he said, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people from the hand of the Philistines and the hand of all their enemies. And then if you read down to verse 18, Abner's plea to these leaders is, then now do it, which is a lot like that Nike tennis shoe ad campaign that came out in 1987, where Nike said, just do it. And that campaign, it brought Nike a lot of success, and it set them apart from all the other athletic gear companies. And Abner's campaign here, now do it, it had the same effect, because this is going to change everything, because this was a great plan with no opposition to unite all the tribes as quickly as possible without any bloodshed, to do this all by diplomacy and to do it in peace. Where David, he has no reason not to negotiate with Abner. He has not been personally at war with Abner or King Saul. So David, he's showing respect to Abner. And so Abner, he goes down to Hebron, where David was, and he brings along 20 men with him to go sign contracts. They're going to make a covenant. And so David, he makes them a feast, and the deal is done. And so Abner goes to leave to go do his part, because he's to go gather the people under David. So it just really couldn't get any better until Joab comes home with his raiding party, where he finds out that David had received Abner and sent him away in peace. And by David sending Abner away in peace, it's much more than just saying goodbye, like, we'll have a good trip. Because sending him away in peace means that he is promising Abner safe passage, that Abner is actually under David's protection. And we might think it's strange that Joab and his men, they're still out there in raiding parties and raiding all the foreign populations, because now they're the regular army. They're not like bandits anymore. But this is the way how they funded their ongoing operations. And so now he returns and he finds out about Abner, and Joab goes to King David and he makes his complaint, and he accuses Abner of being a double agent, that Abner's spying out the city for Ishbosheth to attack it. And I don't really believe that Joab really believed that. I don't think Joab would ever be able to receive Abner for any reason because of his hatred for Abner for killing his brother Asahel. Because here, Joab, he would be considered to be the avenger of blood for Asahel's death. And Joab, he also has another motive here, because Joab, he doesn't want to be replaced as commander over David's army. And Abner, he would have more experience in leading the whole army of Israel with over 20 years of experience. And Joab here, he doesn't just betray Abner, but he's also betraying David, because he's taking on authority that he doesn't have. And then with him calling Abner back to Hebron and not honoring David's order to let Abner go in peace, he's disregarding David's guarantee of safe passage. So he's basically overriding David, his king, which is a betrayal. And so right after Joab leaves David's presence, he sends for Abner, and he probably does this in David's name. So Abner, he doesn't know he's coming back to see Joab. He probably still thinks Joab is away on a raiding party. And Abner, he hasn't gotten that far away. So all of this is happening really quick. because the messengers, they reach Abner at the well of Sireh, which is only 2 miles north of Hebron. And so you kind of would never believe that these things could all be so complicated and until you read it here, all these timings. It's like this perfect storm. And Joab, he has this all planned, and he's planning this very quickly, but he's been planning on taking revenge on Abner for his brother's death for a long time. And so when Abner returns to Hebron, Joab, he takes Abner outside the city gates because Hebron is a city of refuge, which means that this is a city that is safe for a manslayer, which means somebody who has committed manslaughter, until the elders of that city decide if the man who killed someone, they committed manslaughter or they committed murder. And Abner, he wasn't a murderer. He killed Asahel in battle. There was absolutely nothing more that Abner could have done. It was during a battle and it was in self-defense where Abner pleaded with Asahel to turn aside because he had no desire to kill Asahel. He did everything in his power to be able to prevent it. And Joab, he knows all this, but he's going to murder Abner anyways. And he's pretending to do it under the guise of being an avenger of blood. And that's why he can't do it in the city. Because if he murdered him in the city, it would be murder. Because Joab would have had to have listened to the elders of the city. And so Joab here, by murdering Abner, he is throwing away all the good that God was doing for David and for Israel, putting his own vengeance first above all the interests of the nation. And so Joab, he stabs Abner in the stomach under the 5th rib, the same way that Asahel was killed. But here with Abner, it was not in self-defense like Abner did. It was not done in battle. And Abner, he had no idea it was coming. This was just plain old cold-blooded murder. And I don't know why David didn't put Joab to death. Maybe it's because he was his nephew, or maybe it was because there were those who sympathized with Joab, or maybe he needed him to be able to command his army. We don't know. But I am sure that David doesn't know here if he will be able to recover what Joab lost in those negotiations with the tribes coming together to make David king. Because the tribes of Israel, they could have looked at this as David being the one behind Abner's death, as if it was David who betrayed Abner after making a covenant. And where David's reign, it ruled by brutality. But as soon as David heard of Abner's death, he distances himself from Joab and Abishai, because Abishai, he's also involved somehow because he's also charged by David as being a co-conspirator. And David condemns them. And he pronounces a series of curses on Joab. And all these plagues that he curses him with, they're all found in Deuteronomy 28. And then David, he commands Joab to tear his garments. And he forces Joab to mourn Abner along with the whole army. And he has them all put on sackcloth. And David himself, he publicly follows the coffin. And he fasts for the whole day, weeping and wailing, which are things that kings don't do. And then David, he gives Abner a royal burial in Hebron. And then he sang this song he wrote for Abner. And this song says that Abner didn't die for any fault of his own, that he shouldn't have died like a fool dies because he was never a prisoner. His hands weren't bound and his feet weren't in chains. But he was killed by wicked men. And so David, he's talking about Joab and Abishai, though he doesn't mention them by name. But the way that David handled this, it says that all of Israel was pleased, that he did it right. And it's not just because it was politically right, because it was really right. And we know that David was actually sincere here because he does end up proving it later when he appoints Abner's son, Jaasiel, the chief officer over the tribe of Benjamin. And then David, he calls Abner a prince to his servants, and he says that a great man has fallen in Israel. And then in the very same breath, he says that the sons of Zeruiah, his sister's sons, his own nephews, Joab and Abishai, that they're too harsh for him. And then we start chapter 4 with Ishbosheth. who we also really don't know much about. We don't know anything good or bad. But it seems in all of these matters that he's the real loser here, because we know he wasn't a great warrior or a strong, capable leader, that he's only been a puppet king whose fate was really in the hands of Abner. And he was already scared when Abner was changing his alliances to David. And now he knows it's inevitable that he will lose his kingdom. And he doesn't have a plan, and he doesn't know what to do. And so he's depressed. And so we see he starts to taking a lot more naps in the afternoon. And he's not the only one who's troubled here, because the whole kingdom is troubled. And though the leaders of Israel, they're aware of Abner's meeting with David, the common people, they weren't. And now they're all hearing that Abner's dead. And Ishbosheth here, he's not knowing David's intent. He's probably in fear for his life, that David will be coming for him next. And there's no Abner to protect him. So with Abner gone, we're introduced to these two other captains of Ishbosheth's armies, and they're brothers. They're also both from the tribe of Benjamin, and their name is Baana and Rahab, who I call banana and rhubarb, and it sounds like something Bev would make for us, like a crisp or something. But these guys, they should really be called something like Tony and Luigi, because these guys, they act like mobsters. But right here in the middle of their story, which seems like a really odd place, we're told another story, a different story. And we're introduced to Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. And we hear about this tragic accident that occurred to him when Saul's household was fleeing after Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle. Because at that time, the whole house of Saul, they were fearing that the Philistines were going to come and execute the whole royal family, all of Saul's descendants. And at that time, this boy, being only 5 years old, he was dropped by his nurse. We don't know how. Maybe she tripped, but whatever it was an accident. And Mephibosheth, it left him lame in both of his feet. So maybe he broke both of his ankles, and they didn't really know how to set bones that well back then. But the reason that he's mentioned here at this time is because now that boy is 12 years old, and he's the last living heir to Saul's throne after Ishbosheth. And then we come back now to Banana and Rhubarb, also known as Luigi and Tony, because this story is about as violent as any mafia movie. And with these two knowing that Abner's deal was dead, because Abner was dead, they should take this opportunity to make their own deal for themselves, a deal that's in their own best interest with David, just like Abner was doing. And so these gangsters, they're now trying to make themselves a deal that you can't refuse. But these guys, they're not as diplomatic as Abner, and they have no honor or loyalty to anyone except to themselves. And so these two trusted captains of Ishbosheth's army, they're going into Ishbosheth's palace, pretending to get some wheat from the storehouse to feed their men. And they bring in this empty bag, but they're not going to put grain in it.
Let it go.
Thanks for listening to Change Your World. Change Your World is an outreach of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, and your neighborhood church. If you're listening to Change Your World in the Detroit metro area, why don't you join us for church this Sunday? Our service time is 10 a.m. at Calvary Chapel, Waterford, 183 South Winding Drive, Waterford, Michigan. We're competing with the Catholics. It's only an hour. All the donuts you can eat, and you don't have to believe a thing we say, but it could change your world.
You need to change your world.
The rest of today's message can be heard at yourneighborhoodchurch.org. So check us out and download the app. And until next week, remember,